right. Well, all right. I think that's a good time. People are still coming in. We're going to go ahead and get started. I just wanted to welcome all of you to our webinar, The Power of the Human Microbiome. And who I have here with me today is Dr. Stephen Barrie, VP and Head of Clinical Nutrition here at Viome, and Janelle Connell, Senior Translational Science Nutritionist here on our Clinical Nutrition team. And I'm so happy that they're joining us today, and we're going to talk about the human microbiome, and we're also going to focus on your health goals for the year. And so one of the things that I do want to say also is that, Stephen, you have a nickname that are also known as.
Many nicknames.
But the one that I want to talk about is the godfather of the microbiome. Can you give me a little bit of a background on how you got that nickname?
Sure, and that's better than the one that Naveen says. He says the grandfather of the microbiome, so I prefer the godfather of the microbiome, I guess. Well, basically, I've been involved in thinking and researching and developing tests and therapies and protocols for about the microbiome for probably, I guess it's 40 years now. Back when I was first a physician and back in the mid-1980s, the microbiome wasn't talked about very much. And we did a bunch of research and understood the importance of the microbiome as it affects the entire human health. And what's gratifying for me and amazing for me is to see what's happened over the past 40 years from our intuition and our ideas now have been turned into actual science and research and treatment protocols, et cetera. So it's been an exciting journey to see the progress of the relationship of the microbiome to the human health.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you are a trailblazer, and we're so happy to have you here with us, and you as well, Janelle. I think you guys are going to have a great conversation today. We want to move forward to the first slide and talk about the Earth microbiome.
Sure. Thanks, Lisa. First of all, I'm really excited to be here talking with everyone. It would be great if we were all in the same room together, but these days that's a little bit more difficult.
I know. Wish we could see everyone's faces.
Right. And I want to mention this is a conversation between Janelle and I, and hopefully you all. So it's not some talking heads or a lecture per se. It's a conversation, and we hope you like that format as well. And also a little caveat. During some of the times when I might be sharing information with you, I might pick up a piece of paper from my desk, which has a quote on it, perhaps from a research article. And rather than my just saying some things with my words, I think there's some very important words in these articles that it's best for me to read directly. So you might see me hold up a piece of paper and read something.
Yeah, and Stephen, I'll add to that kind of conversation piece. And we have a few of our team members on that are helping to answer questions if you have them, but Stephen and I will take some time at the end too to answer questions.
Right. And this is fun for me, by the way, to be talking and doing this with Janelle. We're work colleagues and spend a lot of time talking about projects and work stuff, but this is fun to be working with her and presenting what we do to the rest of you. So Earth microbiome. I thought just a quick start of this would be to give you an overview of really what the microbiome, what it is in terms of total. There is a microbiome that exists in the air. Our entire planet is covered with a microbiome. Remember, microbiome are small little one-cell organisms, bacteria, parasites, phages, viruses, fungi. They are all the microbiome. And they exist in the air, the water, the soil, on plants, in every living creature. So the microbiome is truly all around us, and life on planet Earth could not exist without the microbiome. It's involved in the soil, how plants grow. It's involved in how plants are resistant to diseases. In the air, it's involved in, let's face it, making beer and making, good French bread. It's the yeast in the air in the bakery that make a good French bread.
Also, a lot of the photosynthesis that happens on the Earth too, right?
Right. So it's more than just what's on or inside us, which of course we're very much interested in in terms of how we can improve our health and lower our risk of disease and have healthy aging. But just want to set the stage with it's all around us. It's very, very important for the survival of the planet. And that's what we would call a healthy microbiome. Okay, and now let's talk more about bring it back down to us. And Janelle, I think you have some thoughts on thinking about it from a human perspective.
Sure. So it's almost like we're our own little planet within ourselves, right? So just like our Earth is covered with microbiomes, so are we. We have a few different areas that there's been more research in. Some are listed on the slide here, like the oral microbiome. We often think about that in terms of our dental and gum health. It's really so much more than that, but yes, there are microbes that maybe contribute to some of those conditions. There are also microbes that are beneficial within the oral cavity that we want to care for, that relate to things like our blood pressure. Skin is next. Our skin is covered with microbiome. I think it's become more popular now to think about that, especially in the products that we use, that we put on our skin, our lotions, our body washes, things like that. And how can we find more gentle solutions to support that? Because our skin is a barrier for us, and those microorganisms help to provide that and try to keep pathogens out. And then the gut is here on the slide. Obviously, that's one that we have a deep appreciation for, probably has the most kind of studies backing it at this point, but our gut is responsible for so many things, the microbes there, whether it's, producing vitamins like B vitamins, vitamin K, fermenting fibers and helping us digest certain foods. But our gut microbes also, they regulate hormones. They produce neurotransmitters. So they really have this systemic effect all over the body.
Yeah, the body's primary immune system is actually that takes place on the gut wall.
100%. And let's maybe move to the next slide. We can talk a little bit more about that.
Well, if you leave this here for a quick second, interestingly, since the microbiome exists everywhere on our skin, on surfaces and stuff, if we think about what happened for many years, we went in the United States or in the Western world, the sanitization process. We were spraying everything to keep everything antibacterial soaps, antibacterial washes, antibacterial mouthwashes. All those really have created an incredible problem because they've killed off not just some bad microbiomes, but all the good microbiomes as well. So just want to mention that.
Yeah.
Okay,
definitely.
Next. Yeah.
So how does this affect our health? We've kind of mentioned a few of those areas already. Obviously, we know we need vitamins. We know we need to metabolize our food efficiently. But like Stephen was saying, when we kill off some of those beneficial microbes, we get downstream effects from it. And the example with the oral microbiome is a great one, right? When we use those kind of antiseptic mouthwashes, yes, we kill off some of the bad, but we also kill off the good. And we might kill off some of those microbes that produce nitric oxide from our veggies, our dark green leafies that have like the nitrates in them. And that nitric oxide helps reduce blood pressure. So there's an association there.
And it's what happened with the overuse of antibiotics. Antibiotics certainly have a role in health to potentially, kill off some bad bacteria, but they became so overused, especially in the West, that they were killing off everything. And now, of course, physicians don't try to really minimize the use of antibiotics because of the long-term effects. And actually, a single course of antibiotics over 7 days disrupts the microflora of the gut for up to 3 or 4 years.
Wow, that's incredible. You mentioned earlier the immune system, and I just think this is a really fascinating area with the microbiome. It's drawn more attention over the past couple of years as we've really thought more about our immunity. But your microbiome early in life, it trains your immune system. So it's going to teach your body what to react to and what not to react to. Our microbiome has this ability to either, stimulate the immune system or calm it. So it just has these widespread effects. And while maybe it's not a top 10 health goal, I think subconsciously we've all been thinking about how to boost our immunity over the past few years, and the microbiome has that direct connection. So let's go to the next slide.
Well,
Steve,
and
you can
before
lead
you,
us into that.
well, I just want to add to what Janelle said in terms of how the microbiome works and how it can affect our health. The microbiome, healthy ones, can produce lots of metabolites, these small chemical messenger signal molecules that can go all over the body. They can go into the brain, they can go all into all the other organs, and they have an impact on what's happening systemically throughout the entire body. These chemical signaling messengers that the microbiome can or cannot produce.
Definitely.
Okay. So if we all can remember, maybe we want to forget, but if we all can remember 2.5 years ago, there was this thing that seemed to have started in China called SARS-CoV-2 and COVID, and spread all around the world within 3 or 4 weeks, it would appear. And what I remember, the biggest thing that I remember that I was so disappointed in, if you think about the healthcare system of the West, and that's the United States, 20% of our GDP towards this very sophisticated healthcare system. Think back of what the system was telling people to do. What was it that the medical system was saying? We got the solution. Well, wash your hands and wear a mask. That was it. Nobody talked about improving your immune system or what you could do to help your body, lower the risk of getting COVID or lower the severity of the COVID. It was wash your hands, wear a mask, and grin and bear it. And yep, a lot of people are going to die. Well, what bothered me was, since it goes back to what Janelle just mentioned, the relationship of the microbiome and the immune system. It was obvious to many of us that, well, wait a minute, there is more things you can do there to help improve your immune system. One of the biggest ways, of course, is to make sure that you have a healthy, functioning microbiome that's working in harmony with your body and with all the other microbes. And I was so disappointed that this wasn't part of the advice that was being shared with the public. Certainly functional medicine doctors and other physicians and healthcare workers who were aware of this were sharing it, but that was a small minority. Well, it turns out now, 2.5 years later, that a tremendous amount of research has been done about, gee, why do some people get COVID? Why do some people get mild, severe COVID? Why do some people don't get COVID? Why do people get long COVID? And it turns out the central story in all the research is the gut microbiome. So just British Medical Journal, makeup of the gut microbiome influences COVID-19 severity and immune response. Okay. Gut microbiota composition levels affect the cytokines and inflammatory markers. You might remember that was being talked about. Why did people have
storm, right?
Cytokine storm, big inflammation? That's why people were dying. They couldn't breathe, etc., because of the cytokine storm. It turns out that the gut microbiome is correlated with the cytokine levels and these inflammatory markers. Again, British Medical Journal, it suggested the gut microbiome is involved in the magnitude of COVID-19 severity because it modulates these host immune responses that Janelle mentioned. And now they say that probably the best way to contribute to reducing the severity of COVID-19 and preventing long COVID is somehow understanding the gut microbiome and manipulating it so it has less inflammation, and COVID-19 therefore is less severe. So we've come full circle again, recognizing the importance of microbiome, and this is now a major research. All the major medical journals are talking about it. It's just a shame it took us 2.5 years for them to get to know what we already knew.
Right.
Okay.
And I think that's such a great point today. I imagine we're just going to keep coming back to the microbiome as this central player in really any area that we're trying to improve in our
Mhm.
health. Immunity obviously being one of them. We can go ahead and switch to the next slide. So Lisa, do you want to introduce us into this topic?
Yeah, sure. So obviously it's January and people are turning over new leaves and making their resolutions. And we did a little looking around to see what were the top health and wellness goals for this coming year. And this was the collection that we put together as we saw it to appear on most lists that we looked up: more and better quality sleep, exercise more and improve fitness, eat healthier, lose weight, mental health and wellness, be happier, and then also learning a new skill, a new thing to do, picking up new hobbies. And so that's a great list to start with. So how are we going to talk about these health and wellness goals with our topic today?
Well, being Viome, we're going to talk about how the microbiome interacts with these and can help us achieve these goals. And I wanted to, and if I could take one quick step back, which I think sets the stage for this, when Janelle was talking about microbiome and the human body, one thing we didn't mention then was the incredible genetic potential of the microbiome, which actually is a lot more than the human genes. The microbiome genetic genes are a lot more, and the potential a lot more. And I wanted to read this great quote from The Lancet, one of the major medical journals. Virtually all human physiological processes in the body are involved with the genetic potential of the microbiome, whether it's mental illness, psychiatric disorders, depression, bipolar, or anything else. Any chronic physiological process in the body is involved at a foundation level with the genes expression of the microbiome. I mean, this is a statement which is really, really powerful, and I think covers everything we're going to talk about now.
Yeah, it's incredible. Even as we prepared for today, almost all of the research articles we looked at the role of human genes in some of these weight loss, exercise, things like that. And almost every time they find that human genetics plays a very insignificant role, but what do they see playing a big role? The microbiome. So
Right.
that's really cool.
Yeah, lifestyle and the microbiome.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah,
Well, I know, Stephen, setting goals is a big thing for me. At the beginning of every year, I have my kids sit down. We write out goals for the year. We try to keep them really manageable. So some of these resonate with me and some of the things we're working on this year. We had first on our list, I think it was improve sleep. There's a lot of people who struggle with getting sleep, whether it's, the amount of sleep or the quality of the sleep. So tell us a little bit about how the microbiome plays a role there.
Sure. And let's also start again at a high level. Having healthy sleep is really, really important. But healthy sleep, it's not just the hours, that's one factor, length of sleep, but it's how much sleep you are in the various sleep cycles, the deep sleep and the REM sleep, et cetera. So having a good sleep really is the foundation for good health and good healthy aging. So we mentioned, and the truth is, even myself is so involved in the microbiome, up until about a year or so ago, I didn't relate the microbiome to sleep. I had all kinds of ways when people would talk to me, say as a physician or whatever, they wanted to improve their sleep, lots of ways to do that. I never thought about taking a look at the microbiome and getting the microbiome back in balance. And it turns out I was missing something that's just significant.
Yeah, I think a lot of us, if we're working on sleep, it's the microbiome is probably not the first thought that we have.
No.
Yeah.
So how it works is we mentioned metabolites before. We haven't mentioned the gut-brain axis, but we'll be talking about that actually in several of these topics. But it turns out that the gut and the microbiome in the gut are intimately connected to the brain through several ways. There's a nerve, the vagus nerve, that connects them, and then metabolites that the microbiome produces circulate in the bloodstream and end up affecting the brain. So what kind of metabolites they produce therefore affects what our brain is thinking and doing, mood and appetite we'll talk about, and also sleep. So there's this two-way communication happening all the time. And it turns out there's actually more communication coming from the gut to the brain than from the brain to the gut. I give a lecture sometimes on gut-brain axis, and my first slide says, who's really in charge? It may not be the conscious of our brain.
So it's bi-directional. We get that communication both ways, right? I know when I think of sleep, I think of melatonin. A lot of people take melatonin supplements. That seems to be kind of the hot topic. What's interesting is that, in order for us to make enough melatonin, it's really dependent on our serotonin. And where's the majority of the serotonin produced? In the gut. So we get that.
And by the way, science didn't know that 5 years ago.
Yeah.
5 years ago, we did not know, 6 years ago, that most of the serotonin that the body needs is produced is made by the gut bacteria. This is a whole concept that no one even knew about.
Yep, a whole new thing. So if we're not taking care of the gut, we're going to see that effect, right? Lack of serotonin, maybe the lack of melatonin, and then we get to the poor sleep.
Right. And it turns out that this is not just a research idea, showing the connection. They've done studies where they fed a increased prebiotic fiber diet to both animals and to humans, and then monitored the microbiome, and then showed that it improved sleep. So people who had low fiber intake in their diet had a very imbalanced microbiome, were put on a high fiber prebiotic diet. Their microbiome became more imbalanced, and their sleep improved. And this brings something that I think many of you might know that Viome is particularly interested in, and it's not what bacteria are there or aren't there that's important, because the same species of bacteria can produce different metabolites. Some are good, some might be bad, depending on the ecosystem, depending on its community. And as Naveen likes to say, just like humans, our behavior depends a lot on the community that we're in. And the same thing in the microbiome. So we're very much looking at what they are doing and not doing. And it turns out that they do better things if they have more fiber to feed them. And one of the better things they do is help us sleep better.
Yeah, what a simple tip too, right? To increase the fiber to get better sleep. I love that. I also think there's research that looks at shift workers, and that's really interesting as well. We know that shift workers are more at risk for certain health conditions like diabetes, heart disease, things like that. And I've gone a little back and forth. It's almost like the chicken or the egg. When we have this input, right? So our lifestyle makes a difference, because when we disrupt our sleeping patterns, we see changes in the microbiome. So our actions change the microbiome. Likewise, an imbalanced microbiome then affects our sleep as well. So there's really two factors.
Right. And it turns out that the microbiome has its own circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythm, people might remember, is the biological process that's like a clock inside our cells. And it turns out the microbiome has their own. And if we disrupt that, they don't like it, and they start to produce toxins and metabolites, which then our body doesn't like. So the microbiome, by the way, is there for survival. The microbiome, and we'll talk more about this, the microbiome does things to keep itself alive, and that affects the host. We're this little carrier that the microbiome are living in, and we take them around with us everywhere. But if they don't like what's happening, they tell us through these signals to the brain, and that depends on what they want. And if you had bad bacteria there, they may want things that is not good for us.
Yeah. Before we move on to our next health goal for the year, I'm hoping we can kind of wrap up each one with a few actionable items that we can think about. So you mentioned fiber. I think that's a huge one for better sleep. Make sure we're feeding our gut microbes. What came to mind also was meditation. Not only is that calming to us, but there is evidence that also helps with a more balanced microbiome as well. Helps
Came out
handle
2 weeks ago.
Yeah,
research.
So interesting. And of course, we have to pair it with our good habits. We talked about the lifestyle habits. We want to get to bed on time, wake up around the same time each day. So there's this combination of taking care of the microbiome and taking care of ourselves there.
You want to have a blackout curtains, perhaps.
Oh, yeah.
You want to not have your dog get in bed with you like I have during the night 3 or 4 times. That's not a good thing, but I can't stop him.
Disruptive there.
Right. But by the way, you mentioned going to bed at the same time, having a bedtime ritual, not eating, 3 hours before bedtime, not trying to use devices a couple hours before the bedtime. Kind of obvious, but most people don't do it. But having at the same time appears to be really, really important for good sleep.
Exactly. Yeah. So some really simple things we can think about.
Yep.
I'll jump into our next health goal, which is fitness. So a lot of people are trying to be more fit this year, exercise more. I know we've seen research in the past that shows athletes have a more diverse microbiome. So what's going on there? What's the impact with exercise?
Well, and first, let's say, why do people want exercise? I mean, other than why do they want exercise, right? Well, it turns out that, they feel good. Physical, and that's because it produces a hormone, which helps us feel good, actually. Physical activity lowers the risk of chronic illness. Physical activity extends the period of what I like to call healthy aging. Physical activity improves cognitive function. And basically, it decreases overall mortality. Now, we're not talking about being a gym rat. We're talking about regular exercise, which could be fast walking, 30, 40 minutes a day, yoga, all kinds of things, certainly. But it decreases overall mortality, and it's going to allow people to have a healthier life. So that's why we want to exercise, right?
So when you say want to exercise, there might be some of us who want
need to exercise.
Yeah, I think that that desire factor is really interesting. And there was a study that just came out last month, so this is really new, but they're connecting our desire to exercise with the microbiome. And this was, I think it was done in mice. So we have to kind of apply it as cautiously there, but when they looked at it, they're looking at performance. How much do these mice want to run, right? And you can see high performers versus low performers, and they look at all sorts of differences. Genetics didn't play a significant role, but what did? Their microbiome differences. Then they gave these animals antibiotics, and do you know what happened? Their running performance decreased by 50%. Isn't that incredible? I couldn't believe
the
that.
microbiome. Wiped out the microbiome.
Yeah. And they looked then at their brain, and they found they're not getting as much dopamine. They're not getting that feel good sensation from the exercise after the antibiotics.
Right. So the microbiome is producing molecules, right, that activate the sensory neurons that stimulate exercises associated reward areas of the brain. So, the brain has all the different areas. One area is its rewards, and it actually stimulated that area of the brain that made you feel good after exercising. Incredible motivation for prolonged exercise. Now, I think even though it was done in mice, we've seen enough research done in humans, not like this, but that associated the stuff, like with the athletes you mentioned, who have a different microbiome balance than people who aren't elite athletes.
So when it's hard to wake up in the morning and you don't want to exercise, you can blame your microbiome for that, right?
Right. But and the good thing for your resolution is, beyond blaming your microbiome for it, you can then do something to help your microbiome and produce those sensory stimulating molecules to give you that reward.
Yeah. Since it's that dopamine that drives your desire to exercise. There's things like in your microbes use tyrosine, an amino acid, for that. So thinking about foods like tofu or eggs or turkey, right? Those can all provide that substrate that your microbes need to produce it. Another idea is think about like a low to moderate exercise. There's a lot of research that shows that your microbiome flourishes more with a moderate exercise than a high intensity. So, or at least mixing it up. I know high intensity can be great for other purposes, but having a balance and having those lower intensity days as well.
Yeah. I think what you're hearing, the common theme in these things that we're talking about, is the fact that things don't just randomly happen in the body, whether it's randomly developing a disease, doesn't just happen in a day typically, and all these life things of exercise and sleep, etc., are patterns that end up having a connection to lots of processes in the body, and the microbiome seems to be a master controller of many of those processes. So it kind of it's what's tying everything together, interestingly.
That's a great point.
Yeah. And by the way, the microbiome is everywhere. It's in your eyes, it's in your nose, in your ears, and we're not going to talk about it today, but it's in your lungs, it's in breast tissue. It has a big health impact in all those areas that are just separate things to talk about.
Yeah. All right. Should we move on to our third
Sure.
health goal for the year? All right. So this is a big one. Everyone's top health goal, which is to lose weight, of course. It keeps coming up year after year. So what are we missing? How are we overlooking the microbiome with our health goal here?
Well, I sometimes start and when I'm talking about this in the lecture, I have a big slide that has a giant chocolate chip cookie with someone shoving it into their mouth with a big smile on their face. And it turns out that behavior is more than likely being regulated by the certain bacteria microbiome that person has in their gut. There are bacteria that thrive on sugar, that like sugar as their preferred fuel. And if you have a lot of that bacteria in your gut and they're not getting sugar, remember that connection we said to the brain before? They're sending signaling molecules to the brain saying, you see that little bakery you just walked by? Go inside. And actually signaling to change our behavior of what we eat and what we don't eat. It's amazing.
Again, our microbiome is playing a role in our desire, right? That's really cool.
A study was done again in mice, but very applicable to humans, that they showed an absence of certain gut bacteria caused the mice to binge eat.
Wow.
And when they then replaced that bacteria in the mice, they stopped the binge eating. So, we can't just blame it on the microbiome and say, nothing I can do about it. So therefore I'm going to binge eat and be 300 pounds overweight. No, you can therefore change the microbiome, understand what's happening, and make that change.
Yeah. And that's what we focus on here, right? So through our foods and our actions. There was go ahead.
No, I also you mentioned the antibiotics before. They did other experiments, antibiotics with mice, wiped out all the microbiome, and again the mice just overate because of no microbiome. Yeah.
And when you talked about the composition, it reminded me of a study that just came out last month. They followed people for a year who were losing weight. It was over 600 people. So it was really interesting. They had them on 2 different diets. And for the most part, everyone lost weight in the first 6 months. But then what they found is that only a subset of people continued to lose weight for the next 6 months. And I think all of us can relate to that. Long-term weight loss is hard. So they looked at all.
That's why there's so many diets.
Yes, we just keep cycling, right? They looked at the factors, and genetics wasn't a significant factor. Exercise wasn't. Adherence to the diet wasn't. So these people were still adhering to the diet and not getting results. But what was a significant factor was the composition of the microbiome again, and that these people who were successful long-term with their weight loss had more microbes who break down fiber, or fiber degrading microbes. Like Stephen mentioned, right, these microbes are beneficial. They produce molecules and short chain fatty acids and things like that that are good for us, are good for regulating our blood sugar, for our gut lining, all sorts of things. So yeah.
And it was found, actually, there were two particular species of bacteria that they fed mice that stopped the overeating. Now, maybe we'll see products in the future with that. I'm not sure, but and again, that's not the solution. So again, you're not figuring out the cause by doing that. You're just doing a quick treatment, and maybe that's good to start. But you can't just feed them the two bacteria and say, okay, that's it. Maybe that's a good temporary treatment. But then we want to get it so the body's doing that naturally, not that you're having to take these two bacteria all the time.
Yeah. So those actions, again, we kind of come back to fiber. This one made me think, filling the majority of your plate, 75% of it or more, with plant-based foods. Your microbes, they love that fiber. We want to encourage those fiber degrading microbes to thrive. So I think that's a really great place to start. And then you can supplement with some of those probiotics to maybe help the balance within your microbiome as well.
Janelle, do you want to mention a little bit about resistant starch, talking about fibers and stuff? So, and people want to say, oh, there's soluble, insoluble fibers. What do I do?
Resistant starch is really a fun one, because we think of like green banana powder. I think that's a really popular one. But it works like a prebiotic within our microbiome, essentially. A lot of times maybe with some less symptoms than some of the other fibers we experience. It also helps regulate our blood sugar levels. And we know that that's connected with our weight and things like insulin production and insulin resistance as well.
And what's the difference between soluble and insoluble fiber?
Soluble fiber. You're putting me on the
spot.
I know, goodness. It's the whether or not it's absorbed, essentially, the water.
Okay, and they have different health effects.
Right.
And our diet should include both soluble and insoluble fibers.
100%. Need them both.
Yeah.
Yep. All right.
Okay.
Getting a quiz
What's
here,
next?
guys. All right. Our fourth one.
I'm in trouble. She's going to ask me something next.
For you. Less stress. We want to be less stressed this year. I think it's been a stressful year, I will say. Be happier, improve mood, mental health. Now, this is an area I know, Stephen, we see a really strong connection with our customers. Even we see a lot of improvement there as they improve their gut microbiome. How does this relate back to that gut-brain connection?
Again, it's the chemical signals, the chemicals that turn into signals that the gut's producing or not producing, that's affecting our behavior. It's affecting our mood. It's a big factor in depression, and that was the serotonin connection that you made. It's a factor in all kinds of cognitive impairment diseases, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, etc., memory loss. These are all involved, connected to what kind of signals the microbiome and what kind of chemicals they are producing in the gut. I mean, it's extraordinary. And this has become perhaps one of the most well-researched topics, because currently modern medicine has very little tools for this, other than some drugs, which end up, one, not being very effective and have some very, very bad side effects with it. So it turns out that everybody's now looking to the microbiome to help develop tools to combat cognitive impairment and how to help our mood.
Yeah. So like you said, we talked about serotonin being produced in the gut. We talked about dopamine. GABA is another one that's a neurotransmitter that I would say kind of has like a calming effect. So that's a great one to think about when you're working to reduce stress. And back to the fibers that you talked about before. when we eat fibers, it helps our microbes produce short chain fatty acids. And some studies have looked at when we increase short chain fatty acids, we actually alleviate some of the symptoms of depression. So there's a direct connection there.
And a common theme that we at Viome talk about in terms of diseases, or how disease process happen, is inflammation. So inflammation is related to most kind of chronic conditions and lack of wellness that we have in all parts of the body. And since we're talking about now the gut-brain connection, it turns out that the microbiome is intimately involved in brain inflammation. An article just came out, actually is 4 days ago, related to Alzheimer's disease, which is related to inflammation of the brain. And there's a particular chemical, ApoE isoform, which is totally dependent on the microbiome connection. And so neurodegeneration caused by brain inflammation is totally dependent on the microbiome producing this chemical, which passes through a leaky gut, passes through a permeable blood-brain barrier into the brain. So
that's incredible.
Yeah.
So you're working on your goal this year to be less stressed. Think about your gut. Think about feeding it those fibers, or even there's some foods that contain those neurotransmitters. Shiitake mushrooms are a great one for that. That kind of leads into, Stephen, our last goal. I want to make sure we have a few minutes for questions today.
Well, yeah, and I'll just read one more thing.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
On top of it. So in terms of the brain, so this is the ways that the microbiome can affect the brain. So vital role for the gut microbiota, brain communication is brain development as an infant. We briefly mentioned that in the beginning. Behavior and function. So it includes the blood-brain barrier permeability. It can increase that permeability. It can increase the brain volume. It can change the neural circuitry, including it can change through these microbial-derived molecules, which include neurotransmitters. And you mentioned the short-chain fatty acids as well. So there are like 7 or 8 different ways that's what's happening in the gut are actually directly affecting what's happening in the brain.
Going there. Wow. So this also ties into the goal of, what if you just want to learn something new, right? You want a new hobby. I know for my 7-year-old, his goal this year is to learn how to cook, which of course I love that goal. So he's got a new skill that he's working on. We've talked a lot about the gut microbiome, but how does our oral microbiome relate to our cognitive health?
Okay. Well, this is another area that over my 40 years, it's only been the last 3 years that the awareness developed of the incredible importance of the oral microbiome on systemic health. So we've known that the oral microbiome is important in terms of what's happening in the mouth, in terms of cavity formation, in terms of bad breath, in terms of inflamed gums and leaky gums, in terms of tooth loss, obviously all connected there. But little was known about what happens beyond. And it turns out that both because of the bacteria that you might swallow getting into the GI system, and the metabolites or bacteria in the oral cavity passing through what we now call a leaky gum into the systemic circulation of the body, that this now has a tremendous relationship to virtually all chronic diseases again, especially the cognitive function diseases, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, mood, learning something, wanting to learn something new, depression. It's actually also related to risk of colon cancer, breast cancer, and heart disease. So we're right now really emphasizing, and we'll have some new products out emphasizing the importance of the oral microbiome in terms of to help you have a healthier mouth, but also for you to have a healthier rest of your body.
Yeah, I found it so fascinating that they found P. gingivalis, which is that microbe responsible for our inflamed gums, in the brains of people with cognitive disorders. It's just wild.
So and that's because of the inflammation that it's causing, and which is causing what we used to think of as blood-brain barrier, which we think nothing could get across. Turns out that's just not true. It become permeable. It can become inflamed, and that actually allows bacteria and their metabolites to pass through into the brain. It's just incredible.
All right. So if you're working on learning something new, maybe think about your oral care, right? In that process. The usuals: brush twice a day, floss. The water pick is not quite as effective as actually using floss, so keep that up. And then we mentioned before, mouthwash. Be really mindful of the type of mouthwash, right?
Do not use a alcohol-based antibacterial mouthwash. It destroys all the bacteria in your mouth and sets you up for actually a lot more oral problems and a lot more systemic health problems.
Definitely. Yep. All right, Lisa, Stephen, anything else you want to add before we turn it over to Lisa?
No, I don't think so.
All right.
We have hours we can talk about things, but
hours and hours. So we do have some questions, and I know that our cohorts are behind the scenes trying to answer some of the questions, but we do have other questions that I do wanted you guys to answer live. And
Lisa, remember we talked about in the beginning that the hard questions go to Janelle, right?
That's right. That's right.
Bring them on. Bring them on.
So I noticed there were 3 people that asked separately about the connection between your microbiome and specific issues. Like one was dementia, and then Elise asked about ADHD, and there was one more about Alex asked about rheumatoid arthritis. So is there any connections, or is there possibly any connection between the microbiome and these conditions?
Definitely connections, not possibly. Well researched in clinical trials and well understood in clinical practice. So all cognitive diseases are related to the microbiome, both in terms of lowering risk, increasing risk, right? In terms of onset of cognitive dysfunction, and in terms of how do we cure that, and how do we get someone back healthy from cognitive dysfunction. And same with rheumatoid arthritis. Great research. And there's been great research for years, but even in the past few months, some really great research on the relationship with rheumatoid arthritis and the microbiome.
All right, excellent. So another question, and I'm going to bring this up because Mike wasn't quite sure what he heard you say in the beginning of when we started talking, Stephen. Mike asked, was the point that the microbiome's health impacts the expression of your genes, or vice versa? And that's a very, very important point. So I wanted to bring that up and see if we couldn't answer Mike's question.
Sure. Most things are what we would call a two-way street, right? So lifestyle affects our health, right? And the microbiome affects our lifestyle. So it's always a two-way street. So in terms of expression of, so we quickly go back, people understand that the DNA, our genes, the DNA are not really involved in development of chronic disease. DNA doesn't ever change. DNA by itself is maybe involved in 1% or less of rare genetic diseases. Everything else is related to what the DNA is expressing through RNA, right? And many factors affect that. And the microbiome affects that, lifestyle affects that, something called epigenetics affect that. Actually, you can affect the expression of future generation genes in your children, actually in their children. So what a woman does now during pregnancy can affect her grandchildren from an epigenetic gene expression point of view. It's pretty wild.
Wow.
Really cool.
That's totally amazing. So going back up to the top to sleep, when we were talking about sleep earlier, I noticed that Carol asked, are both of you wearing glasses to block blue light? I am. Just want to let you know I am, and I know how many hours a day I stare at the computer screen. It definitely helps. And blocking that blue light is one thing that will help your your circadian rhythms stay normal, and also turning off electronics a little while before you go to bed and stuff like that. Is there any other advice on blue light?
Yeah, you've got it. I'm blocking them as well. So yeah, keep your blue light off at least an hour before bed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that includes
I don't wear. Oh, go ahead, Lisa.
I was just saying that includes television. Some people are like, I fall asleep with my TV on. I'm like, you do? How does that work?
Yeah.
Right. So yeah. So I don't have blue light glasses, but I am pretty specific about not using my devices an hour or more before I go to sleep. And people who don't do that, who watch TV falling asleep, they're probably waking up tired in the morning, even though maybe they slept for 7 or 8 hours. They're still waking up tired. Again, it's not just the length of sleep, that's a factor. It's the quality of the sleep. And if they were wearing an Oura Ring or their Apple Watch monitoring the sleep, or something underneath their mattress, lots of devices, they would see what's happening with that. By the way, I recommend that. So we didn't mention that, but there are any number of very good sleep tracking devices on the market now in various price ranges for people. But monitoring your quality of sleep and then taking action when you see it's not what we recommended, and then you can see the change. The beauty of it is you can see the change. So as you do things to improve the quality of your sleep, you'll see it. On the app on your mobile device, you'll see that your REM increased, and this increased, and that decreased. So these are great tools that will really assist getting the best sleep. And you're going to then wake up with lots of energy in the morning.
All right. Yeah. That's what we like. We like to hop out of bed and get to work. So Alex asks about, moving on from sleep, Alice asks about, what about plant toxins? When you were talking about eating more plants, eating healthier, he says, I feel a lot better eating meat. So do you have any advice or thoughts around that?
That's an interesting one. So obviously getting tested with Viome is helpful, where we can look at which plants are going to be most helpful for you based on the pathway activity of your microbes. So that's step one. Some people though they're more sensitive to certain things, whether let's think about like lectins or other things that are in plants, right? You can pressure cook to help with that. You can soak your nuts and seeds. That makes it a little bit easier to digest. So there's some different tools you can use. Overall, I think what we found within the research, as well as at Viome, is that a primarily meat-based diet might have some short-term benefits, but in the long term, it tends to be pretty hard on your gut microbiome, and that catches up at some point.
And I would add just a couple of quick things. Beyond the fact of how important a personalized diet is, because remember, what we believe in, and the evidence shows that there's no universal healthy diet, depends on what your body needs at that point. The only diet, if you leave aside out personalized part, that's been shown consistent health benefits is the Mediterranean diet, which includes mostly plant and a little bit of meat. And when you talk about lectins, you're in the back of your mind most likely are thinking about a friend of mine, Steve Gundry, who popularized this. And unfortunately, if you looked at the basis of the research he would always quote that supported what he was saying, it turns out that the conclusions were always different than what he was just saying if you bothered to read the research. And I know Steve, we've talked on workshops and seminars together, and he'll basically admit that this was a really cool, different thing to popularize. And if you're going to write a book and you want to sell a few million copies, you make it controversial, and you just say something that no one ever thought about. And that's what happened with the whole lectin story. But there's not a lot of scientific basis for it. Interesting theory. And you can make a whole story about it. You can write a book about it, but not a lot of good research on it.
All right. Let's see, we can move on to exercise. That was your next topic. Ralph asks if moderate exercise is better for the microbiome than intense exercise. How is it that athletes have a high level of microbiome diversity? It's a good question. I don't know. Is there research about athletes having high level of microbiome diversity?
Yeah, there is some research showing that athletes tend to have a more diverse microbiome. Now, that could be contributed to a lot of things, right? We talk about they are exercising regularly. They're probably eating really well. Maybe they're sleeping well. There's, a number of factors there. So it could use more research. It'd be interesting to find out. On the flip side, there's some research that says, hey, those who, have some moderate level exercise tend to have a more diverse microbiome. So,
and I think, Janelle, as I recall some of the research, it wasn't just increased diversity. It was a specific microbiome pattern that the elite athletes had. So their specific pattern was different. What's causing that pattern to be different? Hard to say because research wasn't done to determine that.
To be determined.
But I agree. But most of the research does show that that for most people, moderate exercise, one, is the best for healthy aging and best for the microbiome. And since we talked about best microbiome, I just mentioned, because someone mentioned the lectin diet thing. It turns out that most, and I'll use this term lovingly, fad diets, whether it's keto or paleo or whatever, all of them have been shown to be destructive of the microbiome, and all of them have been shown to be over time to not be healthy. Name a fad diet. Popular, I know, but if you look at the research, it turns out over time not to be very healthy for anybody.
Agreed. And, as being a lifelong dieter, I can definitely attest to that, besides knowing exactly what you need to eat, it's definitely moderation and consistency. Because, like the people who eat healthy all week and then binge on junk food all weekend, that's not really moderation. So
can I make a controversial statement about the paleo diet?
Yes.
Why not? That's what I do, right? So paleo diet, eat like the cave people ate. Well, do anyone recall what the average life expectancy of a cave person was? 17 years. Right? Now, true, they got attacked by lions and rocks fell over them and they had poor hygiene, blah, blah, blah. That caused a lot of the deaths. But there's no evidence at all to show that was a healthy diet for anybody. How could you say eat like the cave people ate? Because that's healthy. They never lived more than, an old person at that time was 20 some odd years old. So that's my story on the paleo diet. Another one of those diets that gets a lot of traction, maybe has short-term benefits for weight loss or something, but again, is not very good for the body. And humans didn't just eat meat. Humans, they were harvesting stuff, and that's how civilization changed, was through plant environment and everything else. They didn't do very well just on eating. Civilization didn't go very far just on eating meat. So exactly. my controversial comment, I know we'll have lots of questions saying Dr. Barrie is an idiot, whatever.
Well, we're going to end on that controversial topic comment. And because we are at time right now. And what I want to do is I'm going to reshare my screen because we do have and
by the way, we've loved talking with you. So, and
yes.
Again, wish we could have even more of a two-way conversation beyond just the question and answer thing. So.
Exactly. Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Stephen Barrie. Thank you, Janelle Connell, for joining me here and bringing these topics to our listeners and answering all their questions. And for our audience, I just want to let you know that we do have a code for you if you want to continue or start on your Viome journey. Use the code JANWebinar and you can save up to 45% off the original prices on any Viome test. So we have obviously the full body intelligence, health intelligence, and gut intelligence. This code will work on all of them, and it's good through Sunday. So please join us on your health journey. And I want to thank everybody again for coming. And we will be holding, obviously, our regularly scheduled webinars, and we have lots of other live events in the works, and we can't wait to tell you about them. Stephen and Janelle, thank you so much, and we want everybody.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody, and we'll see you back here again really soon.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.